This graphics card right here is a EVGA Nvidia GeForce 9800 GTX Plus, which is a mouthful and a half to say. It is a high-end graphics card from the year 2008. If I am not mistaken, this would be equivalent to a RTX 3090 from today. Now, the reason why is this right here is the fastest single GPU they released. Then there is a faster version called a 9800 GX2, which is basically the 9800 but with two graphics cards on it. And that would probably be the RTX 3090 Ti of today. But today I'm going to be throwing absolutely every single game I own at this graphics card to see what is playable, what's not playable, and is this even a decent graphics card for somebody to buy and use in 2022. Alright, starting off here in the desktop, we've gotten a i5 3450 CPU with 4 cores and 4 threads, 16GB dual channel DDR3, and of course the 9800 GTX Plus. In GPU-Z, you can see all of its specs, including its 512MB of DDR3 VRAM, which will be certainly interesting in 2022. But without further ado, let's get into the first game, which is Minecraft Java. And on medium settings, 8 chunks render distance, the game was running really good. It was getting around 70 to 100 frames per second, and was actually being CPU bottlenecked, and the graphics card wasn't always at 100%, it was hovering around 80, and it was also at 1080p. Then I decided to try out some shaders, and the first shader I tried was the Complementary shaders, which is my favorite shaders in Minecraft. And it ran really smoothly, though smoothly meaning it's not dropping frames, it's just not gaining frames. It's stuck around 0 to 1 frames per second and just sitting there. The graphics card usage is also around 0 to 1% used, which is weird. It's just not utilizing the entire graphics card for some reason. I think I will blame that on the limited DirectX support. Then I tried out the BSL shaders, and at 1080p it was running a lot better. The graphics card was actually being used, and it was getting around 17 frames per second, which is not an ideal frame rate, but keep in mind, we're still at 1080p, so turning the resolution down might actually do something here. Just for fun, I tried to overclock the graphics card, and I overclocked it to 750 on the core clock and 1230 on the memory clock. That was as high as I could push the graphics card, and it was still getting the same frame rate, so that didn't really achieve anything, but it was a nice thought. Then I tried lowering the resolution down to around 720p, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was actually getting a somewhat reasonable frame rate of 25 to 35 frames per second. I know that FPS might not sound impressive, but keep in mind, this graphics card is from the era when people were still using Pentium Ds, Pentium 4s, and Core 2 Duos is their main CPUs. When I say main CPU, I mean decent CPUs from that era. The next game up on the list, or well, maybe I should say not on the list, is BeamNG Drive. It didn't launch. The reason why is the graphics card is missing DirectX 11, which the game needs. The next game up on the list is a rather light game. It can run on pretty much anything, and it is Brawlhalla. The settings I were using was, well, there's not really any settings. It was at 1080p, and that was about it. There's literally not any settings you can change in the game to change appearance. And I can't get the MSI Afterburner overlay working on here, but the game felt really responsive, and it didn't feel like there was any lag spikes at all, so it was probably getting 60 frames per second. The next game up on the list is CSGO at 1080p on the lowest settings, and the game was running perfectly fine. It wasn't going to give you a 144 frames per second high refresh rate experience, but it can handle around 70 to 80 frames per second in the game with no issues. Sometimes it went over and hit 100, which is quite neat. So on the low settings, at least for a player like me who is an absolute noob, the game is 110% playable. Then I went over and turned the settings up to medium, and the game went from running great to running fine, I guess. It was getting between 40 and 70 frames per second, which the top end of that is perfectly fine. The lower end of that could get a little bit dicey in CSGO, since keep in mind, CSGO is what people call an FPS game, or basically, you need very fast reaction times in that game, which I don't have in the first place, but I don't have with 40 frames per second either. And there isn't really that big of a graphical difference between low and medium settings in CSGO anyway, so you're better off playing on low settings. The next game up on the list is a Crab game, and the game was running just fine at 1080p. There was literally no complaints whatsoever. It was getting around 77 frames per second average, and yeah, there's nothing to really talk about. It ran. Then I tried medium settings, and the game went from that nice, smooth 70 frames per second all the way down to a glorious, still smooth, but not nearly as nice 14 frames per second. So yeah, on Crab games, stick to low settings. The next game up on the list is Muck, and with the texture quality all the way up, and the shader quality and anti-aliasing all the way down, the game ran around 70 frames per second, just like it did in Crab game. So yeah, there's no complaints here either. Just don't turn the settings up to medium because it lags, just like it did in Crab game. The next game up on the list is Dota 2, and the game was on the absolute lowest settings, besides a few settings like anti-aliasing being turned on, and the game ran 110% fine. It was getting around 140 frames per second the entire time. I don't know how intense the game gets, if it gets any more intense than this, but at least from what I did here, which is basically nothing, the game was running 110% fine, plus an extra 17% on top of that. Also, I should say, even though it should go without saying, the VRAM on this graphics card is pretty much maxed out the entire time. 512 megabytes of VRAM just isn't quite enough in 2022, if you know what I mean. When I say maxed out, I mean in all the games it runs, not just Dota 2. The next game up on the list is Gas Station Simulator Beta, and the game was running horrible. It was on the lowest settings, and it was getting around 4 frames per second. And again, the graphics card usage was hovering at around 0% usage the entire time, and it was also on the lowest settings. And I'm assuming the reason why is because it's missing DirectX 11. I'm assuming, I don't know, just something about this graphics card and some games makes the graphics card basically not get used in the absolute slightest. I think this game would have ran pretty good if the graphics card wasn't at 1% usage. The next game not on the list is New World. The reason why I say not on the list is because it didn't open. It said, sorry, your graphics card doesn't meet the minimum requirements, so you gotta get a new one, or something like that. It just didn't launch. Likely due to the lack of DirectX 11. The next game up on the list is GTA 5, and GTA 5 at 1080p on the lowest settings, well, lowest meaning normal settings. The game was getting around 25 to 30 frames per second on the starting mission. And the starting mission meaning chasing a car going down the streets in the city of, I don't know what the city name is in GTA 5. Then I tried out 720p, and the game ran a reasonable amount better. It was getting between 50 and 40 frames per second, so sometimes though it did drop down into the 20s to 30s, though that's either due to the CPU or the VRAM. I don't know which, because the graphics card usage did drop when the FPS dropped that low, though the CPU usage didn't rise. It was around 40% usage. So I'm assuming maybe it's due to the VRAM, I don't know, but it was a playable experience, and I played through the entire start of GTA 5 on this graphics card, and I had no issues at all, besides those random frame drops into the 20s and 30s. The next game up on the list is Fortnite. It was getting 59 frames per second on the unknown settings, and it was running perfectly fine, until it inevitably crashed before it actually got to the game menu. Yeah, you didn't see that coming, did you? You probably did. But yeah, I couldn't get to the main menu. All I got was the connecting ... and the loading bar, and after that the game just basically crashed. I'm assuming it is due to the lack of DirectX 11 on the graphics card once again. The next game up on the list is City Skylines, and I just want to give you a quick warning. If you get bothered by flashing images, skip past this part of the video, because City Skylines is broken. So it was getting around 30 frames per second, and that was nice and all, though the game was flickering a bunch of just, I don't know. Yeah, if you're looking at this, I don't know what to say about it. It's very, very broken in half. I know I sound like a broken record, but I'm going to say DirectX 11 missing once again. The next game up on the list is World of Warhammer, and it was running at around 10 frames per second, and also the textures weren't loading in. Not much else I can say about it besides DirectX DirectX 11 missing, or something, I don't know, it just doesn't look right. The next game up on the list is just something already, and the game was getting around 7 frames per second, and the graphics card was barely being used. It was being used at 1%. But I don't want to show much more of the game because, well, it's not very good for YouTube. The next game up on the list is Minecraft Bedrock on the highest settings, screen animations turned off, and 16 chunk render distance, and it was running perfectly fine at 60 frames per second VSync on a single player world. Then I tried Skywars on the CubeCraft server, and it was again running just fine, 60 frames per second. Even though I'm getting a smooth 60, it doesn't really help the fact that I suck at PvP, but you know, at least you know you can play Minecraft Bedrock on this graphics card with literally no issue in the absolute slightest. The next game up on the list is Roblox Arsenal with a unlocked FPS, and it was getting around 140 frames per second, 1080p on the lowest settings, and it is a perfectly playable experience. Then I tried medium settings and it was getting around 40 to 50 frames per second, then I tried the ultra settings and it was getting around 30. So yeah, just stick to low settings on that game. Then I wanted to see what kind of GPU benchmark I can get on a 3D Mark, and I tried several 3D Mark testing things, and none of them worked, probably due to DirectX 11 missing once again. But now it's conclusion time. Do I recommend you to go out and buy one of these GTX 9800 GTX Pluses for your main... What just fell off? It just fell off the graphics card. Do I recommend you to go out and buy one of these for your main computer? No, I do not. Yes, the performance is not bad at all for how old it is, but it's also really lacking in DirectX support. It's a nice graphics card, it looks quite nice as well, and it performs quite nice in games that it actually runs in and doesn't have like 1% graphics card usage. But yeah, with the lack of VRAM and the lack of support in most games, and also its price tag, it costs like $30 on eBay. No, don't get it. Just get like a Quadro 600 or something for cheaper and probably perform better than this, and you can play more games. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video and taking a look back at this old graphics card that's like an RTX 3090 from 2008. If you enjoyed, it would help out a lot if you could leave a like, but thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you again next time.